We are on chapter 22.
247.
248. Yeah, well, 247 is about midway down. Okay. So in chapter 20, let's just read the recap. We learned the Zohar's teaching that the first two of the 10 commandments incorporate the entire Torah. The first commandment, I am God, positive commandment, incorporates the 248 positive mitzvahs. The second commandment, you shall not have any other gods, incorporates the 365 negative commandment or prohibitions. To fathom the profundity of the Zohar's teaching, the Tanya began a non-dual reading of the first two commandments. In chapters 20 and 21, we explored the deeper meaning of I am God. The first commandment, that God is the only true existence. Here in chapter 22, we'll be given a non-dual reading of the second commandment, the prohibition against idolatry. In other words, why is it such a terrible sin? Once again, the Tanya will illustrate the non-dual idea through the metaphor of God's speech, which has been his teaching tool in the previous two chapters. If you remember last week, he spoke about God's speech. What does that mean, and how does that equate with our level of speech, so on and so forth. So with that, we'll begin on page 248 with the chapter itself. Rakshatera. Excuse me, I have a little more coffee here. It has water in it. Rakshatera Divra Koloshim Ne'adam. Only the Torah speaks of God in human terms. What we know to be is an anthropomorphic statement, right? Which means essentially when we speak about God, says God took the Jewish people out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. What does that mean? The guy has this really long arm and he swooped us up. God doesn't have a physical arm. Or God spoke. Does God have a physical mouth? God thought. Does God have a physical head? So on and so forth. So all these terms that we use are metaphoric, obviously, or anthropomorphic in nature. Okay, so wherever the Holy Scriptures describe him in corporeal terms, in like physical terms, such as God's walking, standing, sitting, speaking, etc., it is always metaphorical. The Torah refers to God's speech, as it were, real speech, like the speech of a person, like you and I speak, because divine speech, while not physical, really does have a profound similarity to human speech. When he says here again, he explains the Kabbalist thought that anthropomorphic scriptural references to God's hand, eyes are symbols of higher reality. Okay, so do our hands, our eyes, our mouth have any semblance of connection to God's quote-unquote proverbial hand, eye, mouth, etc.? The answer is yes. Now, albeit obviously in our case it's a very physical thing. But God is metaphysical; he's not physical whatsoever. But nonetheless, the properties attached to quote unquote our seeing something or our saying something somehow some great spiritual level connect to God saying something or God seeing something, etc. Albeit again on a much more metaphysical level. So divine speech resembles human speech as an act of disclosure through which life energy is drawn downwards to the lower worlds through numerous profound diminishments. So remember last week we spoke about the concept of symptom, where God contracts, diminishes, or conceals himself. So through this whole process, you remember all the different stages and steps we spoke about last week? So that enables something to take on a defined existence. It has like a name. God said, this shall be light. So there was light. Light didn't exist. Light didn't exist before the creation of light. So light is not just the absence of darkness. It's an actual creation. According to many, even darkness itself, as we know darkness today, okay, as like it's dark outside, was also creation. The darkness, the void that existed prior is not like just a black hole or black something. So these are actual creations, light, dark, so on and so forth. And they all take on a semblance of existence, some physical existence in this case, but even the spiritual world is taking on a spiritual existence after God already began this process of contracting himself or diminishing himself, as the word he uses here, to enable these things to take on a definition. For example, even the spiritual world of Atzilut, the highest of the four spiritual worlds, the worlds of emanation, which is an extremely high spiritual level, still has a definition attached to it. Atzilus. It has a name. But there's a higher level than that. If you go keep climbing up the rung, where there is no name for Atzilus. It's all the essence of God, the Ein Sof, etc. Infinite light, exactly. Okay, so as we learned in the previous chapter, God diminished himself, so to speak, to make space for the world. From his perspective, of course, he remains exactly the same as he was before, page 249. And no real diminishment has taken place, just as when you simplify an idea for an audience, you do not lose your grasp of the concept, but from the world's perspective, the diminishments, its tsumim are very real. So if you're a teacher, hey, let's assume you're teaching a class, and you have to be the genius of pick a subject matter. I don't know. You're teaching them philosophy. Okay, we do philosophy, but you're teaching it to a low-level class. Let's say it could be to kids, okay, who don't understand the deeper levels of philosophy. So you have to, you'll forgive the term, but dumb it down. Basically, put it into terminology that the kids are going to understand. Otherwise, you speak to them as a college professor to grad students, so I have no idea what you're talking about. So when you do that, you're diminishing, so to speak. You're contracting. You're concealing your wisdom and couching it in words that can be acceptable or understood by the audience, whoever the audience may be. But it doesn't change the idea in your own head. In other words, the concept itself, the philosophical concept, as you brought up, or whatever it may be, is the same concept. Didn't change the concept, then it didn't change you. It's just a means of how you conveyed it. So when God created the world, he said such and such should happen. It didn't change an iota in God himself. Follow? That's the metaphor. So and there are a variety of different simsumim, these diminishments or contractions, so that a large variety of different creations can come into being. So there are basically 4 levels of creation, right? From the highest level, which you have is minamadaber, which is human beings, those who can speak. That's the highest level of creation. After that, you have anything in the animal kingdom. That's the next level of creation. Beneath that, you have the vegetable world, if you will, anything that grows in the ground. And the lowest level of creation is the inanimate, stones, rocks, etc. But they all came into being because God said something should exist in some way, shape, or form. So the question you might ask, is the life force in a rock the same as it is in yourself, in a human being? Is it the same life force? Say, God made both of them, so are they exactly the same? It's 50-50.
No.
So the answer is no. No. That we both have life forces is true, but is it the same life force? So the answer is no, because the life force, yes, they both have life forces, otherwise they couldn't exist. But the life force in a human being is less diminished, if you will, less contracted from God than the life force in a rock, in a human. Because you see something moving, it's talking. It's obviously more animated. It has a different level of energy in it than a stone that doesn't talk and doesn't move, at least on its own, right? It does, but not like the soul of a human being. It does. It has some form of a nefesh, without which it couldn't exist. Nothing could exist. But the difference is that level of life force is much more diminished. It's coming from the same place, all coming from God, but it's much more diminished than it is in that of a human being, and obviously an animal and anything above it, a plant, a tree.
What is life, or what is the definition of life?
You can call it the nefesh if you want, but a nefesh is the vivifying soul that allows it to exist.
So it has a more limited.
It has a more concealed level of godliness in it, so therefore, it's unable to do what a human being can do. A rock can't think for itself, doesn't have freedom of choice. Honestly, neither does an animal have freedom of choice. Animals basically work on instinct. God created animals to act instinctively. A cat like this, a dog like that, a lion like this, whatever it may be. Each animal, some have a little more intelligence, less intelligence, but the bottom line is that animals are not given the gift of freedom of choice like that of a human being. So, for example, when you see, I don't know, a lion's running around in the somewhere in the Sahara or wherever it is in the African desert, and it sees little Bambi, okay? That also, so you look at little Bambi, you're on a surprise, oh, look how cute that deer is. I wish she could take it home. Well, what does a lion see? Lion sees breakfast, okay, or a snack, okay? Now the lion comes, what? Okay, but let's use a lion in this case. A hunter has a choice, shoot or not. But the lion's hungry. It doesn't see the fact that's a little baby defenseless deer who's standing next to its mother, who's probably going to be crushed over the fact that this baby is being eaten alive in front of it. The lion, none of this goes to the lion's head. It's not like the lion's being cruel and insensitive. The instinct of the lion is hungry, I see food, attack. That's it, period. It doesn't have freedom of choice on that level because it doesn't understand the sensitivity of the mother feeling badly or not. It's not programmed into the lion's mind. Do some animals have more sensitivity than others, understanding? Yeah, say elephants cry, other animals, whatever it may. Sorry?
I said memory, elephant's memory.
Right, elephant's memory, whatever it may be, but still in all, they don't have the concept of freedom of choice that a human being does. Yes, they try to protect their young. They will protect their young, as most animals would, but that's instinctive in the way Hashem programs that animal.
Is that why their heads are down? Animals' heads are down?
Well, it says,
Their eyes are
conversely, it says the reason why man is created erect, standing up, is that you're supposed to be looking up at heaven, not looking at the ground. All animals basically are on fours. That was the punishment of the snake.
Yeah.
The snake went in the Garden of Eden. It says initially was created with legs to walk. Okay, but it was punished afterwards. The punishment in Torah says in Genesis, on your belly you shall slither. That was the punishment to it. Exactly. Okay, back to the human beings here now. Section 2. So the concept of page 249. I don't know if anybody's on Zoom here that I didn't even check. Sorry. No, there's nobody dinging over here. Okay. The concept of God's diminishment also sheds light on the question how evil can come to be in a non-dual universe. What does that mean? And these diminishments and the hiding of God's face are so great and profound in scope that they're able to cause impure things, klipos, the shell, that which conceals, and sitrachar, the opposite of holiness, to come into being and be created. These great simsumim, these great diminishments, enable such negative entities to receive the life-sustaining energy from God's word and the breath of his mouth, as it says in Psalms. Through such a profound hiding of God's face and descent to countless rungs, this is the simsum process, so that even evil is able to absorb the energy. Meaning that even something which is abject evil, right? Let's say it's the bottom of the barrel for evil, still has to receive its energy to exist from God. But does it come from the same place as goodness, as blessing and the light? They all come from God, so what's the difference? So when it comes to things which are antithetical to God, the sides of impurity, of evil and the like, they are termed other gods. Okay, so what does it mean? And when he uses the term Elokim Acherin, other gods, it's in reference to klipos. Klipa again means a shell, something which conceals the godliness. So what does the second commandment tell us? What is the second commandment of the 10? Thou shalt not have any other gods, right? Do not worship foreign gods. So the Zohar, the Kunizar, uses this phrase and applies it to the negative forces and klipas, based on a play of the words that the word acherim, which means other gods. The root of the word acher can also mean behind something. As in the verse where God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you will see my hind side behind me, but not my face. Okay? So again, it's not that God has a front and back. Metaphorically, though, face is absolute revelation. The hindsight would be more at a concealed level. It says that Moses was able to perceive the knot of the tefillin in the back of God's head. Again, whatever that means, spiritually speaking. But that's the level which is higher than a higher level of godliness than any other human being was able to see ever. But still, in all, it's the hind side. But beyond that, that's still extremely high level that Moses saw. But then there's what's called the behind, the hinder side of God, which basically represents more and more concealed, a greater level of concealment, as opposed to seeing the front, which represents that of revelation. Why is that? On page 250. For the negative forces, suck their energy not from God's face, but from the behind, the achorayim of the holy energy, the hindsight. Uferish achorayim, the simple meaning of the word behind, is like a person. If you have to give something to your enemy, let's say, not that you would have any, but in the event that somebody has an enemy, you have to give them something. Are you going to put it on a silver platter and present it to them? Or it's like throw it behind your back and say, get lost and I won't ever see you again. More likely than not, that's the attitude. It's like, I have no choice. I don't want to see you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. But I have to give this to you. So it's almost like you chucked it behind you. You gave it to them, but you're not going to give them, in a sense, the honor of even looking at them, etc. In essence, this is sort of reference to the behind, the rear, the hindsight of godliness. It's like God still has to sustain, is sustaining Sitra Achra, the opposite side of holiness, abject evil, impurity, and the like, albeit it's coming from this much more diminished level of godliness. So it works similarly above. God's face symbolizes his inner actual will and true desire. Namely, that God desires to bestow life energy from the realm of holiness to all those that are close to him. Now, again, as he says, obviously God doesn't have a face, an actual face. When we say something is bestowed from God's face, it means that he genuinely desires to give life energy to that entity because it's something good. So there are two reasons basically why you might desire something. Either A, because it's something you want, just you have a desire for it. Or B, because it's a means to an end. In other words, I don't necessarily need that object, but I need that object to get to where I need to go. For example, you want to buy a new car, okay? But to buy a new car, you need money. So the money really is a means to the end. The end is getting the car. The money is just a means of me getting there. So God only sustains the negative forces because they are a means to an end. What is the means to an end in a negative force? Their presence endows us with free choice. If you didn't have evil didn't exist in this world, we'd be robots. There's nothing to choose from. Free choice means that I can actually make a choice of either good or bad. If bad doesn't exist, then what am I choosing? If I'm only good because only good exists, then who's going to give me a round of applause?
So
what's the big deal?
Evil people pick up negative energy from the hindsight of God.
Yes, that's where they're sustained from.
Okay.
Anything that's evil. Evil people, evil actions, whatever it may be, anything which is antithetical to what God wants. And as a Jew, for what Torah says, or stipulates for us. That's all from the source of Sitra Achra, the opposite side. Okay.
Are you saying also that his backside is more revealed, or it's just
No, it's more concealed.
More concealed.
Revealed is the front side, the face.
Yeah.
The radiation of the face of God, radiance of God, rather, not radiation, but the radiance of God's face. Right, again, it's a metaphoric, and because he could not physically, as a human being, even Moses would not be able to handle the direct radiance of God's face. Correct. It was too much, too intense. In general, when we speak about God's, doesn't go through it right over here, but in, again, these are metaphoric things. It's not, what does it mean he saw the knot on the back of God's tefillin? So it says that God wears tefillin. Why? Because anything God commands us, we, the Jewish people, to do, he himself does. So how does God do it? Obviously, he doesn't look like us. He doesn't have arms and legs and fill with black straps and black boxes. Okay. But nonetheless, on some spiritual, metaphysical level, God is fulfilling these things. Moses was able to appreciate some great godly revelation equated with this.
He interpreted it.
That's the way he.
That was his role.
Yeah, I guess. I wasn't, honestly, I can't speak for Moses, but that's how it was described. Yes.
But then God says he speaks to Moses, turning out.
He does, which means essentially, but not necessarily that Moses sees his face. Again, Panamapana means he was able to speak to him straight up, as opposed to all the rest, the vast majority of all the rest of these prophets have to either prostrate themselves, laying down, unclothed, in some dreamlike state, but they couldn't have this, like a conversation per se, face to face. is the term that's used, but it doesn't mean physically face to face. It means that they're able to communicate straight to each other whenever or whatever.
But still considered as a level of being.
It's a much higher level, yeah, because well, obviously, if you tell somebody you're gonna have a conversation behind to behind, it's like, well, that's not really appealing. You know what I'm saying?
Is that why we don't?
You wouldn't even look at somebody when you talk to them. It's not
Men does that.
what
Men does that a lot.
Men-
They don't look at each other.
They don't
they
look-
just talk.
men are hard to figure out in general. You know what I'm saying? Yes.
We don't need to be minded.
No, but that's not something that's because of the sciatic nerve. That was the Jacob who struck on basically the sciatic nerve, and subsequent to that is forbidden for a Jew to eat the sciatic nerve. It's called the Gid HaNashek. Because it's physically very difficult to remove, to devein or whatever it is, the hind 2/4 of a cow or whatever it is, an animal. So we generally don't eat like a filet mignon.
No.
Comes in the hindquarters. You'd be hard
I don't
pressed.
mean anyway, but yeah,
I'm
or
saying,
like
but
rump roast, people buy.
whatever,
roast,
anything-
whatever that is. Yeah.
Anything else in the hindquarters, there are some,
But
they call them menachrim. These are people who devein, who it's an art. It's also there's certain fats in an animal which are not permitted to be eaten
Right.
biblically
It
as
must be
well.
very expensive to get that.
But
piece of meat.
there's very few places that will be. There's some spot. I think in Israel, there's some people that say they know how to do it. It's not just a single vein. It's apparently it kind of, and I've obviously never done it, but it kind of spreads out. It's not like a single vein. Take it out, so it's easy. It's not, and that's why it's so difficult to remove. And it's a biblical prohibition. Period. So basically, one second. Basically, the hindquarters of any kosher cow, by and large, are all sold to non-kosher. They don't get thrown out.
Right.
They just use it for non-kosher. Whatever it is, yeah.
You said vein. Are you talking about the plant?
It's a sciatic nerve. Okay.
Okay, nerve.
Yeah, sciatic nerve. But it's not right. So sciatic nerve. It's not a single line like a vein would be. It kind of spreads out like almost like little tributaries.
Yes, right.
And it's very difficult to. They usually call it devein. Denerve is not really a word, but we use that too. To denerve the animal. I made a new word. Huh? It is, in fact, speaking, most people, the vast majority of people, will not do it.
They do it in Europe. I understand it was more like people knew in Europe how to do it, or
There's supposedly some people, and they say in Israel say they know how to do it. I don't know. I never had it. I don't know. It's certainly not a common practice. Are there people that know how to do it? Perhaps. But it's
Right.
certainly not a common, like when you go to your typical kosher slaughterhouses in most of the world, they're not going to do it. Okay. All right. So Rock today, back to the text. Page 251. Avala Sitra Achra. Vahatuma Itevas Hashem Shasani. Sitra Achra, the opposite of holiness, right? The opposite side. And impurity are, quote, an abomination to God which he detests, as it states in Deuteronomy. So he doesn't give these negative forces life energy from his inner will and from a place of true desire that he delights in, chas v'shalom, God forbid. Rather, God sustains the negative forces like a person who throws something over his shoulder, like to the enemy. Whose enemy, since giving this item to his enemy is not his true will. So the question is, if that's the case, why does God even sustain the negative forces? God doesn't like them. God doesn't want them. So why he has a choice to do anything he wants. So exactly. Well, yes. So the answer is he does this only to punish the wicked and to give a good reward to the righteous, hence freedom of choice, meaning to make our decisions meaningful, since the consequences of our actions will be a result of our free choice. And God derives pleasure from those who suppress the sitrach, the negative side, you overcome the diversity. This divine source of life energy from the negative forces is called the behind, quote unquote, the blessed will, divine will. Just as a, although it's not absolutely necessary to understand it for this purpose, but in general, when it speaks about God's will, ratzon, Hebrew word for will is ratzon. Ratzon really represents a higher level than that of wisdom. So you can have chachma, wisdom, right? Which is the highest of the three intellectual properties. Ratzon is will, desire is higher than that. Simple example would be is that you can want something for no good reason. On a very simple, mundane level, the source of desire, even within a human being, also supersedes intellect. It's not like I want something because it has to make sense. It's never happened to you. Everything you want always makes sense. What?
Is this this friend with no good?
No, I understand, but in reality, the root of will, the divine root of ratzon is higher than that of chachma, that of intellect, in any way, shape, or form. And the same thing applies, so to speak, metaphorically with God. God's will is a very high level of godliness, which supersedes that of God's wisdom, if you will, for lack of a better term. Okay, section 3, the negative forces resist and deny God. We've learned that the negative forces and sitra achra, the opposite side, do not receive their energy from God's face, but from his behind. Now, the Tanya will explain that the negative forces differ not only in the source of the energy, behind as opposed to face, but also in the way they receive the energy. Now, God's will, meaning his face, is the source of all life. It energizes all the worlds. So anything that exists in the entire universe and spiritual worlds, etc., gets its energy from where? God's face, the front, so to speak. But since this energy of God's face does not rest at all on sitra achra, that which is something, the opposite of godliness, the opposite of holiness, the other side. On page 252, and even the behind of God's will does not actually become enmeshed in the sitra achra, in the other side. It sustains it, but it actually it's not manifest within it. So how does it affect it? How does it enable it to exist? That behind energy merely encircles it from above, sort of like an encompassing aura, if you will, that allows it to exist. But it's not even potent. It's the potency of that divine energy is not even being manifest within that sitra achra, that opposite of holiness. It's some sort of encompassing, surrounding level of godliness. So therefore, the sitra achra, the opposite side of holiness, is what's called a zone of death and impurity. May God protect us. Okay, that it is has such little level of divine life force, it's equated with that of death. Even the energy that the sitra achra receives from God's behind, the hindsight of God, does not become properly absorbed by it. The sitra acha's life energy is largely trapped and is split off and has become anti-life, since life is really the presence of life energy within something. Okay, so when we talk about life, right, what is life? Life sustains. What is the opposite of sustenance? Death, ultimately, the opposite of life. And that's sort of what's representative of sitra achra, the opposite of holiness. Okay, so the sitra achra managed to absorb what he calls a minuscule amount of life energy, sufficient for its existence, but even that remains exiled and unconsciously present within it. So he goes as in the secret of the divine presence exile we mentioned earlier. And therefore, we can offer a second reason why the sitra achra is referred to as other gods. It's a pretty strong statement, saying that something that's representative of the opposite of holiness is like, quote unquote, idolatry. The second commandment: do not worship other gods. What's the connection? So in the previous section, Tanya associated the negative forces with Elokim Acherim, other gods. Since Acherim, same word as Achor, hindsight, is suggestive of Achoraim, behind, the spiritual source of the negative forces, energy. So now we'll be offering another explanation based not on the source of the negative forces, energy above, but the negative forces' resistance to receiving that energy below. In other words, here you have God at the very top, unmitigated, unconcealed, anything, right? Absolute. Goes through a whole process of tzimtzum, all these various levels of diminishment, contraction, concealment, more and more and more and more and more. So finally, at the bottom of the barrel, you have literally the bottom level of existence. You have the absolute wicked, something which is representative of Sitra Achra, the opposite of holiness. It's still sustained by God. It has to, because otherwise it couldn't exist. But its level of sustenance of life force is like holding on by threads. And not only that, not only is it not really being vivified, that the divine energy is not even manifest in it. It's just sort of, hovering around it. It's barely alive, so to speak.
It's less than like the mineral kingdom, so to speak, rocks and, dirt.
Well, it's
Sand.
less. The answer is yes. I mean, on a certain level, simply because we're talking about something which Sitra Achra, the opposite of holiness. A rock by nature can't be the opposite of holiness unless it became an object of idolatry. So if a person took a rock and made an idolatrous image out of it and was worshipped, so then that becomes Sitra Achra, that becomes a level of divine purity. But a rock in its natural state is not. It's klipas noiga. It's sort of that neutral admixture of good and bad. If you use that for a good thing, use that for a bad thing. Use a rock to build a temple, a Beit HaMikdash, a shul. But that same rock technically could be used to build an idol or a tree. There was a tree that was worshipped called the Asherah tree. That was the name of it in biblical times. That when the Jews came into whatever city was to destroy, they had to destroy the Asherah trees because they were idolatrous. People worship, may sound crazy to you today, but they worship all kinds of things back in the day, right? There are all types of divinations that went on that today you'd think is whoa, that's like way out of here. I mean, there are still some idolatrous practices, true. I mean, particularly in some of the more Eastern religions, they'll worship the cows, for example, okay, in Hinduism, okay? It's worship. How is it worship? Is exactly an idol of God or not, but it's worship. I've never been to India, but it is said, or those areas that, if the cows are crossing in front of you, you're stuck. No, you gotta give them respect. I mean, it's like the gods are walking across. You can't disturb. All right, and I don't mean to gross you out during your sushi, but there were some Eastern cults, let's just say, that were known back in the day to drink cow urine. They would force their adhere. Why? It's coming from the god. Okay, they can say, well, who the heck in their right minds wants it? But this is what they would do. I mean, if you're brainwashed enough, you'll do anything they tell you. Question from the audience.
And I don't know if this is still true, but years and years ago, I had heard, like when my dad was there, that yes, the Hindus idol, like say about the cows, but then they work on them.
They do. Also,
they work on the death of starved, and they use a lot of other them for a lot of other work. So it's not.
It's interesting.
It's like they look up there, don't eat them, and then so it's not.
I don't listen. They have some interesting practices. I mean, cremation is the normal way to go with them. They have huge pyres that they build with wood and they burn everybody on them. I mean, it's like what?
I said with the law religion.
Right, but in India in particular, it's
yeah.
I have
yes.
a question, Rabbi. On the Sitra Achra, it's holy, it's not godly, but I was thinking, is there some goodness that Hashem decides to hide in that Sitra Achra situation that has meaning, and one day it will be holy? I'm thinking.
So it says when Mashiach comes, ultimately.
Because I'm thinking of Lot and the daughters, and what happened out of that was Sitra Achra situation.
However, were created, etc.
However,
true, I understand. So, but ultimately, it says when Mashiach comes to promote that evil or impurity will cease to exist. It won't be around anymore.
Okay.
So anything today, which is Sitra Achra, will no longer be around as Sitra Achra, because the world will be completely pervaded by godliness, and no symptom like we have now, so on and so forth. So even it says specifically regarding a pig, chazir, that when Mashiach comes, the chazir will become kosher. As they say, you can have your bacon and eat it. Okay, only when Mashiach comes, and it's indicative of the Hebrew word for pig, which is chazir, which comes from the word lachazor, to return. It'll return back ultimately to holiness. Right now, it's listen, if you want to talk about like the epitome of non-kosher, anybody would, it's a pig. Now, honestly, lobster is just as unkosher as a pig, and so is a rabbit. Okay, one is not more unkosher than the next. They're both unkosher. But the pig itself has the coveted position, so to speak, of being described as like that's the epitome of non-kosher. So one of the reasons for it is that it says that the pig sticks out when they lay down; they stick out their hooves, right, forward, to show that they're split. Like a kosher animal has to have split hooves. Difference is it doesn't show its cut, but it's sort of like this deceptive, like look that type of thing. Right. So then, but it's become the symbol of like the epitome of non-kosher, even though anything that's not kosher is not kosher, period. Well, it can be anything. It can be any non-kosher.
My question is, and I want to make sure I get this right, you're saying that when that day comes, that the pig now is going to get eaten? I mean, it seems like he's been able to exist,
it
but
will
now
become
he's
kosher.
not good for him.
It will become kosher. According to, if I'm correct, according to many, it will start to chew its cut. It will change. Its property will change. What?
Yeah, but the lobster also, the rabbit and everything else.
And the people still be able to have choice, but they'll always make a good.
Yeah, but our freedom of choice is going to change completely when Mashiach comes. Concept. Right now, you have freedom of choice, true freedom of choice, because evil and good both exist, and you can choose on a daily basis as long as there's air in your lungs. What am I going to do? Am I going to do the right thing? I'm going to do the wrong thing. That's evil based on what Torah says. Once evil no longer exists, what are you choosing from? Your natural desire will only to be good, to do good. That's it. You'll have none of us will have this propensity, this want, the desire to sin. Correct. It's going to be a whole different level of living, a much better level of living ultimately, but takes a little work to get there. It's horrible basically cease to act as the evil, because evil won't exist. So it's not an evil inclination. It'll be transformed into good. So according to Torah, it says that the Jews will live eternally. Specifically Jewish people, it says. Non-Jews, it doesn't say that in this regard. What are we going to look like? It does to be the resurrection of the dead also. Resurrection is a Jewish concept. They took it from us. So we're clear. Okay? So it says that all of our loved ones that died will come back in the physical bodies, not some sort of spiritual concept. What are they going to look like? If a person died and had wrinkles, they're coming back with wrinkles. Is it going to be like a messianic Botox, procession? I don't know. This is God's headache. Okay. No, not zombies. No, but it does say that when Mashiach comes, the blind will see, the lame will walk, the deaf will hear, and whatever physical ailments a person may have had will be gone. Exactly what they're going to look like, come back with white hair, blue hair, green hair. I don't know. I mean, I'm not that picky, honestly. They'll come back. Hashem's going to figure all this out, and it's going to be a whole different level of living. Yes. Where? They're moving some of them to, like some of them East Pasadena, West Pasadena. Understand. So it's a very good, valid question. Okay. And the answer is, I don't know. Hashem, God, the limitation is because we live in a limited world with a limited understanding. When you take limitation out, anything can happen. It says when the Jews would come in biblical times to the temple. Okay, 3 times a year, all the Jews used to go up to Jerusalem in biblical times and pray in the Beit HaMikdash in the Holy Temple. And then we came on Yom Kippur. If you remember during the service, we bow down, we prostrate. So they would do that when they heard God's ineffable name. I don't know how many Jews there were, but a lot back in the day. Somehow they all fit into the temple. And so maybe they were shoulder to shoulder. But if you shoulder to shoulder, how are you all supposed to prostrate? The room doesn't get bigger. It says miraculously there's room for everybody to do it. Does it make sense? Makes no sense. No sense whatsoever. Geographically, it's impossible. But then again, if you're God, nothing's impossible. So all of a sudden, the impossible becomes possible. So in terms of world, will be room for everybody? Listen, Hashem could figure that out. I mean, just
No,
from,
I'm realizing now that
no, it's a good question to ask. It's a very valid question. But okay, listen, it's a good question and should be our biggest issue.
Let me ask one thing, too.
Yes,
Okay, when we're resurrected, it's from the bone in the back of our
so
neck.
it's from the lose, called the lose bone.
Right, but how about those that are cremated, that are Jewish?
So it actually says that the loose bone is an indestructible bone.
Okay, so,
So even though it's a small bone, it's not a, when they cremate people, God forbid, so even so when they're burnt, if that loose bone, it says, is indestructible. So even though when cremation happens today, God forbid,
Yeah.
okay, so beyond cremating, I don't know if they pulverize the bones. I don't know if you know what they do afterwards. If you don't want to know what they do. It's a horrible desecration of the body. Outside of the burning it, the bones don't necessarily burn. They literally pulverize them into dust. It's not a natural occurrence. So anybody needs to be dissuaded from cremation. It is a horrible thing to do to them, beyond it being completely forbidden according to Torah. Okay, but anyway, to answer your question, so that bone or the piece of whatever it always is, from that the body would be resurrected. Obviously, somebody who's cremated unwillingly, in case of the Holocaust, says they go straight to Olam Haba, the world to come. That's God's, he has his own calculations for that. But otherwise, a Jew is not allowed to willingly want to be cremated. Nope. We never do that in this class. No, that's exactly.
So do you think the evangelical Christians, because there's the ones who have that whole thing about the
Returning to the land.
Huh?
Returning to the land.
the second coming and they
Right.
call it the rapture.
But that only happens when all the Jews return to Israel.
Well, no, I've heard that. Well, when the rapture is supposed to, heard this guy one time on the radio. They said really extreme evangelical. He was being interviewed on the radio back when things were more normal. I like Terry Gross on NPR, and he maybe were gay or something like that. Anyway, he wrote these books about the rapture.
Right.
And I was driving and I brakes on those. I'm shocked because she said, so when the rapture happens, the thinking is that everybody, all the Christian, all the evangelicals, that's what threw me, Christian, go up into the heavens,
Right,
and everyone
and
else
we
perishes
have-
on earth. And she said, you mean other Christians too? And he said, yes, everybody except the evangelicals and the Jews. I didn't know if he knew. He said, she goes, the Jews, he goes, well, at that time, because we are the chosen
They're going to
people,
accept. You know who?
we'll ask if we now believe that Jesus is the Christ. And if we say yes, then we are allowed to go up.
Isn't it?
So I just wondered if they took that from what, because it sounds like it's taking
Most
something
of
that we
any
still-
religion, major world religion, is rooted in some way, shape, or form in Judaism, albeit obviously either grossly distorted or at least mildly distorted. But the concepts come out of Torah, resurrection, all this stuff.
But that's what this
Second coming. Okay, well,
Yeah.
we don't believe there was a first coming, so.
Yeah.
Right.
But this concept of resurrection is from the Torah. So you obviously to have a storyline, because if he came once and he's no longer here, and Messiah's not, then you have to have a second coming. Because otherwise something went wrong. We don't believe he ever came to start with.
Okay.
So there's a second coming. What? Well, they do. Okay, Christianity in particular is, we don't have a mitzvah to go and convert or proselytize to non-Jews whatsoever. But there are Christianity and some groups in particular are notorious for having taken verses from the scriptures, our scriptures, and literally mistranslating or literally just changing the context to fit their agenda. Otherwise, because if you don't mistranslate some things, it's like, okay, how does this fit into the picture? So if you know the true translation or the true meaning, it's like it's a bunch of hooey. I mean, which it is. Most of them have no idea what they're talking about. They're coming to proselytizing, knocking on your door. They can quote 5 verses, but you ask them the verse 4 verse after you lost. They don't.
Yeah, Christians are going after the Christians. And that really.
No,
blew
but
me
even when they
away,
come knocking
that
on
They
you-
were saying that the other Christians were not gonna get to go up. And I
Well,
thought,
okay,
well,
listen, you know, I don't, they're
It's-
entitled to their belief. They don't usually knock on my door for some reason. I don't, somehow they seem to avoid my house. I don't know why.
I'm like, I
Well,
thought this
then,
was-
when, you know, they make the meeting in the parking lot, they just want to get up and- no, I'm serious. I really believe that, when, uh, they walked away, they said, oh, okay, all right, walked away, I got rid
They don't usually bother me too often, honestly, on a personal note. Maybe it's because they look Amish or something. I don't know. But, so
Thank you. That was very.
there's the famous line, I'm being recorded. I should probably even say this on recording, but whatever, you know, live dangerously. Or somebody called me Christ killer, you know, whatever. I don't know, you know, well, some anti-Semitic, and my response was that if I killed your God, imagine what I can do to you. And ended the conversation. You're welcome to use that if you like.
I was called that in third grade.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was a common thing.
Yeah, I like that answer. I like that.
They didn't like it too much, but anyway, okay. All right, moving right along here. So, section 4, the psychology of idolatry. I'm sorry, as with the last line over here, at the bottom 252, the Sitrach is referred to as other gods since it really is idolatrous and it denies the non-duality of God, the King of Kings, the Holy One, the Blessed Holy One. Okay, section 4, the psychology of idolatry. Why does the Sitrach deny God? As mentioned earlier, the source of God rejection comes from the ego and an unwillingness to surrender to self. For since the holy light and life energy remain exiled unconsciously within the Sitra Achra, they're there, but they're, you know, barely keeping it alive. The Sitra Achra doesn't surrender itself at all to God's holiness. It thinks it's the king of the hill. On the contrary, rather than humbling and surrendering itself to God, the Sitra Achra inflates its ego, making itself quote as high as an eagle. As Jeremiah states, saying there's me and there's no one else besides me. Me, 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 me. Pharaoh's egotistical statement, the river is mine, this is talking about the Nile, and I have made it myself. Pharaoh portrayed himself as a god, as though he himself created the Nile. That's why our sages of blessed memory said that an inflated ego is equivalent to actual idolatry. Because at that point, there's no room for God in you. It's me. It's all about me. If it's all about me, I got no room for anything else. Non-surrender hardens your ego, giving you a strong sense of separateness, which is a denial of God's presence within you and every other existing thing. So for the basis and root of idolatry, the initial error of perception which leads to an inflated ego, is the perception of being an independent entity separate from God's sacred presence. And he says, in this conviction that God exists, but that you are independent from him, which is the basis and root of idolatry, is not yet a complete denial of God. As Talmud states that, quote, they refer to him as the God of gods, meaning there's these individuals that believe, yes, God exists, but he's the God of gods. So there's God, and then there's the other gods underneath him that are his helpers, his minions, or whatever it is. It's still idolatry, absolutely idolatry. But even though these individuals do not deny God completely, they're not completely agnostic, all right, but they also perceive themselves as autonomous entities and independent beings. And in this way, they separate themselves from God's holiness, since their sense of utter independence causes them not to surrender themselves to him. He says the description of separation from God as idol worship is rooted in the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, on the verse, this is from the Shema, that you turn away and worship other gods. He interpreted this, that you turn away, as soon as you turn your attention away from attaching to the Blessed Holy One, to God, you will worship other gods. it is as if you have become an idolater. In other words, it's one or the other. There's no like parv, like, not dairy or not meat. It's either this way or that way. Either you're surrendering yourself to God, or it's me, it's the ego. And if that's the case, I'm now already following the other God, so to speak. I'm an independent entity of God, which in essence is like that of an idolatrous practice. For as we have mentioned earlier above, supernal holiness only rests on something which is surrendered to him. Therefore, the negative forces, are called in the Holy Zohar divided mountain peaks. That's the terminology used in the Zohar, since their perception is one of separateness and division. Each one thinks it's its own, mountain peak. And this non-surrendered self-image is a denial of God's real non-duality, that in his presence, everything is considered like zero. And all existence is genuinely voided of any separate identity before God may be blessed, and before his will, which sustains all things and brings them into existence constantly, something from nothing. So just a brief recap. There are those who say, yes, we believe that there's God, but God is the God of gods, meaning there's God, and then there's me, and there's the mighty dollar, and then there's the $100 bill, Benjamins, and whatever. They're all different means of whatever it is. So, okay, God created the world. I agree, God created the world. But then nature took over. So they call her Mother Nature, whoever she may be. But Mother Nature runs everything. So there are those that are of mistaken opinion that God created the whole universe, and then Mother Nature took over to ensure now that every morning the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and there's 24 hours in a day, and there's 7 days in a week, and all the rest of the natural things that happen. At that point, though, what are you worshiping? Mother Nature. She becomes a god. Now, there's a God of gods. God of gods is the one who created it, but then there's Mother Nature God. They don't call her a god. And I'm giving you this for illustrative purposes, because invariably, if once something thinks it is an independent existence of God, because I don't need God, then all of a sudden now you begin to worship yourself. You think you're something outside of God.